Hello, everybody. This is Dr. PerCap coming at you, and I'm happy to be here live in the studio. And I've got Cory Blankenship with me today. He's our guest. And great to have you, Cory. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Sean. I'm happy to be here.
You bet. Now, Cory, tell us a little bit. I know a lot of folks know you. You're very influential. You're very well known across the Qualla boundary. But if you could just tell us a little bit about your position with the EBCI and what all that entails.
But currently, I serve as the Tribe Secretary of Treasury. So I oversee the Office of Budget and Finance and all of the finance-related functions of the tribal government. I also have a seat on the Tribe's Investment Committee as a voting member. And so I have strong working knowledge of the investment pool, funds like the Miners Trust Fund, the Endowment Fund number 1 and number 2, and the Debt Service Sinking Fund. And then also working very closely with all of the tribal entities because all of their finances roll up to the overall financial health of the tribe. And so we have that strong working relationship, of course, leaning on tribal council and some of their reporting requirements and looking at capital projects or community-based projects and things of that nature. So anything finance related, our team handles here. We have a phenomenal team of professionals who've worked through a ransomware attack and now the global health crisis. And so I've had a lot of adversity over the last 12 months, but we have a phenomenal team and we really haven't missed a beat in terms of getting those financial processes accomplished and making sure all those transactions occur when they're supposed to occur. Okay,
wonderful. And that ransomware is so scary. I just read in the paper that Haywood County Schools in Waynesville were victims of ransomware recently.
Yeah, we've definitely seen an uptick in the number of ransom attacks, and before actually having to navigate it ourselves, I didn't know a whole lot about it. But I can tell you, in the first couple of weeks, it was like being in a movie script or something. That we're talking about hackers, we're talking about organized crime, we're talking about negotiating the ransom to unlock data. So it was surreal for a little while, but I think that we have an excellent team here, and we were able to navigate and get some systems stood back up very quickly, so that all those essential processes happen when they needed to happen.
Okay. Now you've worked in tribal government for a number of years, right, in different capacities?
I have. I'm right at the 10-year mark now with Eastern Band. In total number of years served, but I've always been within the Office of Budget and Finance. So I started as a senior compliance officer working with all of our federal grant awards. Then I served for a while as the tribal treasurer, as the director of finance, and then under Chief Sneed as the Secretary of Treasury.
Okay. And outside of work, you're a busy man, right? You've got a family, children.
Yeah, so I have 5 sons. They're all enrolled members of the Eastern Band. So I keep that in the back of my mind with all of the decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis. We're really making decisions that are going to impact the future of those boys and of all tribal members' children. And so, that's always kind of the forefront for me, is thinking about the long term and their future and some of the benefits that we enjoy right now. How do we make those sustainable into the future? So we spend a lot of time with the kids, with various activities. We love to travel, and of course we haven't been able to do much of that. So finding fun things to do here in our backyard, and that's pretty easy to do if you just take a minute to look around.
Well, speaking of travel, so you and I, we go back a few years. I think we've known each other probably about 8 or 9 years, and usually I run into you traveling, right? We both travel a lot for work, and I can't even count how many times I've run into you at the airport in Asheville, or I'll run into you in Atlanta, connecting in back home. And I mean, there have been times like I've gotten an early flight, like on a Tuesday morning out of Asheville, and we're on the same flight. Yeah. You're going somewhere, I'm going somewhere, and then come Friday afternoon, Friday evening, we run into each other there in Atlanta flying home. So a couple of road warriors. Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, and I love it. I love having the opportunity to go and work with other tribal governments and other tribal nations and work with these national native organizations to see what other tribes are doing. And it's also a very good reminder of just how fortunate we are here at Eastern Band to have the resources that we have. So it's also a good reminder to be grateful for all of the resources that we have here and the opportunity that we've been able to create for our members.
Yeah, for sure. So this whole pandemic and the lockdown, I mean, how are you adjusting to that both in the workplace and then just at home? I mean, what's the toughest part for you?
So definitely being more confined, to home, following the public health guidance. I think it's really is looking at what public health officials are saying and ways to do things safely, right? You're not necessarily limited to your home. It's not like a jail sentence or a prison sentence, right? You have some opportunities to do some various things. You have to be more creative. And just as an example, going back to the kids, rather than taking them out trick or treating, we designed a scavenger hunt around our yard with clues as to where the next clue was. And so they spent about half hour, 45 minutes, dissecting all the clues and finding the next clue. And then we had a little prize for them once they were all done. And, they were just ecstatic. They were like, that was really fun. That was a great idea. So things like that, just the opportunity. It's interesting because it creates more opportunity for you to do things together. As far as the workplace, we've been very diligent about following the public health guidance. As a result of the ransom attack, we had actually increased our technology capacity. We had refreshed some of our systems. We had insisted on having that remote connectivity and that redundancy. And so that actually prepared us for this global health crisis and this public health emergency, because we were very quickly saying if we're going to keep our operations closed or on a modified schedule, we still need functions to happen. So we can come into the office with a very limited crew, keep people social distance, controlling access to the building, making sure we know who's coming in and out, making sure we know that they don't have any symptoms, that they haven't held any positive tests or any direct contact. So really just following the guidance and being diligent about that, and then leaning on technology and allowing our staff to work remotely. We have access to all of our systems that we need. So it really doesn't require our staff to sit in their offices for those processes to continue to happen. So we've been fortunate in that regard. It's definitely an adjustment, to do those things, to have those remote systems, to have people working remotely. But we haven't seen any loss of productivity, and so I think that's important. And I think people came to realize that maybe could be more productive, or at least more creative, in how we accomplish our responsibilities on a day-to-day basis as a result of this particular public health emergency.
Wonderful. So speaking of that, and speaking of, the pandemic, and what's on a lot of folks' mind right now is how this is all impacting per capita. And as everybody knows, the December payment's coming up here in just a couple of weeks, and down about 32% from last year. So that's down over $2,000. Why exactly is that? What is behind that drop exactly?
So we closed our casino gaming operations in as a result of COVID-19 to minimize the spread within the community, to protect not only our community members, but all of our casino employees, our tribal government employees, and the general public, right? And so that closure, that 3-month closure, had a significant impact on revenues, because essentially for half the period of time that we would be collecting revenues to pay per capita, that primary collection point was closed. And so when you're closed and you're not making money, there's no money to distribute in the form of a per capita payment. So the fact that we've been able to achieve the number that we have achieved with this December distribution is unexpected. And quite frankly, you will see that other gaming entities have not been as fortunate as we have been to see those revenues return to the level that they have. They're still down from prior year, but we actually had a few months where we outperformed the prior year. That's a result of creating some efficiencies and really doing some analysis about how we're allocating resources in that casino gaming operation and becoming more efficient. So even though our number of players is down, the revenue that we've been able to generate is actually on par, or in some instances, well above where we were last year. But that 3-month closure, so half of that per capita performance period, we were completely closed, zero revenue coming in. And so that's where the biggest impact to this particular per capita distribution comes into play.
Okay. And just to remind all the viewers, per capita is 50% of gaming revenues, right? Goes towards per capita payments and minor trust contributions.
Right. So minors trust and per capita payments, everybody gets an equal amount who's an enrolled member of the tribe. And the way that the per capita works is people pay to play at the casino. The casino pays all of its bills. And once those bills are paid, the profit flows over to the tribal government. 50% goes to the members directly in the form of per capita payments, and 50% goes to the tribal budget to operate programs, to fund things like Cherokee Indian Hospital, Cherokee Central Schools, police, fire, EMS, the tribe's general fund, daycare services, public health and human services, sanitation services. So all of those programs that we have that are serving this community are funded to some degree, and some of them wholly, by those gaming revenues. So not only do we see an impact to the per capita distribution, but we also have an equal impact to the services that we're providing. Now, we've been very fortunate in that this administration has been very diligent about slowly scaling back our dependency on those gaming revenues. So in prior years, we were budgeting 100% of plan, or high 90s of plan. We've been successful in pulling that number back down to where we're in this comfort zone of somewhere between 75 and 80% of plan. So we've been able to create some efficiencies on the tribal government side as well. And then if the casino outperforms, we're able to close those revenues, 50% to per capita, but 50% to the reserve accounts of the tribe, so that we can build those permanent endowments, those investment accounts, so that, looking toward the future, those essential services will be less reliant on gaming revenues coming to them, because we have these reserves built, which means we're able to minimize the impact when we have a significant event like this public health crisis.
So you're telling us that there's a cushion built in there, so that on a good year, the tribe doesn't have to tap all of those gaming profits. Some of it is just put away for reserves.
That's right. So, and that cushion is just built on the tribal government side, right? Not on the per capita side. So that cushion is built after the split occurs. And when the split occurs and we're paying our bills here at the tribal government, providing services to tribal members, paying our employees, but we're not using 100% of those resources, right? And we're purposefully not using 100% of those resources, because we have to be able to provide those services regardless of whether the revenue is coming in. And so how do we build that cushion? How do we build that reserve? How do we build that safety net for the tribal government so that our people don't see a tremendous impact in service delivery?
So is it safe to assume then that there won't be a dramatic drop in services between now and the next few months?
And in fact, we haven't stopped any of our essential services, right? And I think that that's really kind of the highlight of this particular response to COVID-19, is that we've continued all of the essential services. We have not pulled back services. We've not scaled back services. All of the things that our people are used to participating in are still happening. The silver lining in all that is I think that we're discovering ways to be more efficient in how we deliver those services, delivering those services with less people or less time. Building in that efficiency over the long run will help us continue to provide those services, hopefully in perpetuity, right? Things like higher education benefits. We still want to be able to provide healthcare. We're finding new ways to do the work, the administrative work, and to provide the service.
Now, a 32% drop, that's dramatic. That's real dollars. That's $2,000 less money in a lot of families, in a lot of households, and in some cases more than that if you have more than one parent that's an enrolled member. But it could have been worse, right? I mean, there were some initial thoughts that the per cap could drop 50%, even more at one point. So definitely not as bad as it could have been. Now, you talked about some other tribes that haven't held up so well. What are some of the challenges that other tribes are running into that the EBCI have been fortunate enough to avoid?
Well, many of those tribes don't have the reserve accounts, right? They don't have that backup plan. So they're more reliant on federal dollars, on grant dollars. And while a significant amount of our resources here are federal grant awards, we're not overly reliant on those awards in order to perform services or to provide administration of services. So that's one area. Another is geography, right? So even though we're not necessarily mandated to follow state guidance, we try to mirror that state guidance. We try to be good neighbors. And so we have a very strong working relationship with the state of North Carolina. And basically we could signal to North Carolina, here's what we're going to do, and here's what we think we can do safely. And even though it might not necessarily conform to what you're doing at the state level, we think that we can do it safely. And so, we've done those things. The other thing is just the number of professionals that we have within the tribal government and the depth and breadth of experience that those officials have in managing through these processes. Some tribes, don't have access to staff, to employees like we have access to staff and to employees to be able to perform those essential services, right? I talked to a tribe the other day that they don't have police, fire, and EMS. They've got a small clinic that's partially funded with IHS dollars, so they're not doing testing on tribal lands, right? They're relying on local hospital facilities, and then they're paying that bill with their CARES Act funding for their members to be tested. And so just thinking about our access to resources here is significantly greater than many other tribes. And then when we're talking about gaming revenues, I think when we talk to tribes who have larger gaming operations, that they are seeing a similar result, right? Things are on pace or in some cases better than what they expected it to be. But for other tribes that don't have other tourism drivers, maybe they just have a small gaming facility, they're not seeing the same type of results. And maybe their states are more restrictive than what North Carolina is here. And so they don't have the ability, there's some gaming operations that aren't open to this day in tribal nations. So that's another thing to take into consideration there.
Okay. Now, December, this is done. That's the amount that the per cap's going to be. Of course, the next payment after December will be June of 2021. And obviously, a lot could happen between now and then. We're currently in this second wave, and it looks like there could potentially be more lockdowns in the next month or so. But any thoughts in terms of the prognosis, in terms of how revenues will be and how that will impact per capita for the payment in June of 2021?
So when you mentioned this before as well, when we first moved into this public health crisis and the initial closure of our casino gaming facility, and then conversations with our management partners and with other people in the industry was saying brace for about 30% of what you're used to doing, right? You're only going to achieve 30% of that. We were looking at our numbers, looking at our customers, and saying we're thinking we could be a little bit better than that. We're thinking out of the gate we could at least achieve 50%. And then in most instances, we've achieved 65 or 70%, right? So the story has been very different for us. And we continue with that. Now, we continue with that mindset and this framework of being cautiously optimistic. We're extremely hopeful, and the numbers appear that we will be able to continue to achieve that mark, averaging things out about 70% of where we were last year. But that's barring any additional lockdowns, that's barring any additional mandated closures. We talk about additional waves of coronavirus, and then still some good news, some positive news about the vaccine, but still some uncertainty about the implementation and the rollout, and then how long it's going to take to actually deploy an effective solution, an effective vaccine, and then how long that actually takes to kind of take root, right, and take hold, where we're seeing some progress in declining case counts, declining hospitalizations, and lessening the impact of COVID-19. So I think we're hopeful that, June will be on track or on par, and hopefully better than that 50% mark. But we really won't know until we get through this first quarter. So at the end of December, we'll have a better idea about where we may end up. And actually, we've held our budgets back. We've held ourselves to that conservative 50% mark through the end of the first quarter. And then we'll go through a series of budget hearings in January with the Tribal Council to look at adding revenues back if we feel like the operations will support that.
Okay. And one thing we want to remember too is that when per capita payment is made, say in December, there's a time frame or a fiscal period that per capita payment is based upon for revenues, and it's obviously it ends before the per capita date. It's not like they're paying revenue, the per cap's based on the previous month's revenues, right? So what is that time frame? Like this per capita payment coming up here in December, what is the time frame that those revenues are built on?
So that would be the performance from March to September, right? So at September 30th, there's a little bit of a delay when we get those numbers from the casino. They've got to close their books. Then they let us know how much revenue they're going to be sending in that final month. And then the other piece that goes into the per capita calculation is those revenues are sent monthly to the tribe, split 50-50. The 50% to per capita goes into a per capita account, and it is an interest-bearing account. So the per capita amount is a calculation that's both the net profit from the casino plus the amount of interest that has been earned in the per capita account. So, there's several variables that come into play there. The other thing too is a calculation of enrollment, right? So people will say, well, why don't you know right away how much the distribution is going to be? Well, enrollment has processes that they go through. They tell us how many ads during that period. They tell us how many people were deceased during that period, and we'll have partial shares, right? So if you were alive for 3 months of that period, then you would receive a partial share of that per capita based on the number of months that person was living. And so all of those processes come into play when we're building this massive workbook of per capita calculation and all the variables, interest earnings, profit from the casino, looking at expenses to manage the account, how much goes to the miners trust fund, how many participants in that fund, what's the total share per capita in terms of the number of enrolled members. So all of that takes some time. And then there's reconciliation processes, there's double checks, there's audit processes that are involved to make sure that we have that calculation correct. And that there aren't variables there that may impact the calculation, and then we can release the per capita number. So it's something our staff takes very seriously. There's a little bit of anxiety behind the per capita calculation each period, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I think a lot of people really wait for that day and are waiting for those numbers. So, and you mentioned enrollment figures, and we're hearing across the country about anytime like there's like a war or crisis and people have to stay at home, there's like a subsequent baby boom, right? That kind of follows up. So I'll be curious to know, maybe, EBCI will see a big boom in enrollment here in the next few months as a lot of COVID babies come into the world, which could change things as well.
We'll keep our eye on it, because that could definitely impact June distribution as well. So
you mentioned the per capita money that gets paid out, that goes into an interest-bearing account. So that's a safe account. It's low risk. There's no worries of principal loss. And those monies are not put into investment funds like the miners trust, right? Which are more long-term.
It's essentially a CD, right? Okay. A certificate of deposit with the bank. It's a U.S. Treasury yield. So it's not a significant amount of money, but it definitely will add to that per capita distribution.
Rather than just keeping it parked somewhere where it doesn't get any interest. I mean, just that much money, even at a very small interest rate, is still going to generate quite a bit of income. Yeah. So speaking of the miners trust and speaking of investments, will any of this impact, now we're thinking about some of the younger enrolled members below the age of 18, of different ages. Will there be any impact to miners trust fund balances with regard to COVID?
Not the existing balances, right? So the amount of per capita that flows into the trust fund, it's the same calculation, right? It's per tribal member, everybody gets an equal share. And so this December's per capita is going to flow through to the miners trust fund. And actually, we've seen a lot of volatility this year in the markets and in the investment accounts. But over the last 30 days have seen significant performance in the markets. And so you kind of go through these periods where you hear media talking about all-time lows and the biggest sell-off, since such and such date. And then we turn around and we get, 2, 3, 4, 5% added back over the course of the following week. And so the performance of the miners trust fund has actually been very significant this year. So I think, when miners see their account balances and the amount of return we've been able to generate for them as part of that fund, even in a highly volatile marketplace, I think that they'll be pleasantly surprised with where those balances stand now. Okay.
And those balances, depending on the age of a miners trust beneficiary, their funds are placed into what investors call tranches or different categories, right? So like a younger person, maybe somebody under 5 years old, would probably be in a tranche that has maybe a little bit riskier investments, maybe a little bit more heavily weighted in stocks and equities with the potential greater return, whereas opposed to an older beneficiary, somebody maybe closer to the age of 18, would be in a lower risk tranche, right, which wouldn't have as many stocks, wouldn't be facing as many risks. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So it definitely used to be that way, that we would, as the miners aged through that particular account, once they hit 17, we would dial back their equity content, right, and actually transfer them to a lower risk, a lower volatility investment. But at Eastern Band, we have a provision in our miners trust of indemnification of principal, which means 100% of what goes into your account in the form of per capita is guaranteed to come out of your account when you reach the age distribution. So we're essentially saying no risk to the miner, right? Zero risk in this account. You're going to get back everything that you put in or that was put in on your behalf, right? And it's just unheard of in the investment world. So when we looked at that as a committee, we said, because you have this indemnification, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us. We can essentially level off that risk by leaving everyone in the same investment pool. And with the staggered distribution, so those age limits, 18, 21, 25, we've lengthened the time horizon that we have to realize that performance, right? So I think it was really just about setting some expectations with how we report that to our minors fund participants. And so you'll notice on the statements that we split it up between your principal balance and your interest balance. And we make it very clear that that principal balance is guaranteed. You will receive at least that amount. So really, the only portion of your fund that's subject to these market volatility or these, the market fluctuations is that very small interest portion of your account. And so I think being able to have that strategy was important for us as an investment committee, because as the plan fiduciaries, it lessens the risk, it lessens the burden on the plan, because we have that indemnification of principal to leave those investments in a regular investment portfolio mix. And so you hear a lot about a 60-40 split in the 401k, 60% equity content, 40% fixed income content when you're younger. And then as you get older, you kind of want to flip that around to 60% fixed income, maybe 40% equity content. The minors trust is actually structured right now to be 50-50. And we have seen extremely positive results with that particular investment mix, 50% equity, 50% fixed income. With that long-term outlook, over the long term, we actually fare better than having that typical 60-40 split. And there's some research that suggests that 60-40 split, when you look over the long term, that person doesn't necessarily make any more or any less than someone who is actively managing those asset classes, right? Because of the swings that you would get in the marketplace. That active management costs a lot of money, right? You have to have teams doing research, making trades and placing those trades on your behalf. And that can be a very expensive proposition. Whereas in the minors trust fund, we have this 50-50 split, some active management, but mostly passive management in that portfolio. And we've fared extremely well over the last several years with that account. We've been able to lessen the risk exposure in that particular account by going to that 50-50 split. And I think overall it's a good decision for the long-term health of that fund.
That's really interesting. And, when I do investing workshops, there's a chart that I use, and it always really amazes people. We think of investing as being really complicated, and there's all these specialized types of investment products like stocks and private companies, publicly traded companies. You have fixed income, which are bonds, kind of like loans that can be extended to companies or governments, and they pay interest. And people really worry about, well, am I picking the right stocks? Are we picking the right bonds? But 90% of how a portfolio or a collection of investments performs really can be traced down to simply how an investor allocates between equity and fixed income and cash. And but yet investors just, people hire these professionals to help them pick very specific stocks or specific types of companies or specific types of bonds from specific governments or specific credit ratings. And in some ways, a simpler approach is actually statistically better than getting too complicated. So, and I think people understand that a lot more as well. So, and just to be clear, so you mentioned indemnification. So what that means is even if there's a really bad year in the stock market, maybe it's down 20% or 30%. And, we see on television, all the newscasters talking about, oh my gosh, all this money's being lost and investors are getting cleaned out. When the minors trust is indemnified, that means even if there's a drop of 30% or 40%, anybody who's a beneficiary in the EBCI minors trust, they don't have to worry about that. Their principal, the original amount of their per capita that gets put into the minors trust, is not at risk. They won't lose any of that, only the potential return that they could generate beyond that principal.
Right. Okay. And that's what we were looking at, and that's why we moved more to that 50-50 split as well, because of the time horizon and the staggered distributions now at 18, 21, 25. We've lengthened that time that you could recover So, if we were just that one distribution at age 18, if you met all the qualifications, right? And let's say in that last year that you were 17, we saw this huge sell-off in the market, and we have this, this impact on your fund. Essentially, when you turn 18, we've locked that in, right? And that's your distribution amount. Now we have this, so when you turn 18, maybe you see a slight decline, but you're getting only a portion of that paid out. So you get a payment. And then you see this kind of glide path up to when you're 21. Now you're getting another payment. Now you're 25, you're getting another payment, and you're being paid out the balance of your fund. We've given you those extra years to recover that kind of initial loss from where you were before. So I think that is helpful as well. The indemnification of principal is just a phenomenal deal, right? If I take $100 of my own money and go and find a broker and say, I want to invest this $100, there's a chance that I'm going to lose my entire $100. But essentially for our tribal members that are participants in this fund, we've said your $100 is safe. And in fact, we're probably going to be able to turn that into $1,000 by the time you exit the fund. But at a minimum, you're going to get that $100 back, what you put in. So as an investor and as an individual investor, you just don't get that kind of guarantee anywhere else.
No, absolutely not. That's amazing. So let's switch gears a little bit, because in addition to tribal revenues and per capita, a lot of tribal governments have also received CARES money, which is part of the whole stimulus package based on COVID. And there's about $8 billion, I think, to date has gone out to different tribal governments. I'm curious, what was EBCI's portion of that, and how is the tribe using that to assist families and individuals on the boundary as well?
So the Eastern Band, based on the formula that came down from the United States Department of Treasury, received just a little more than $60 million. And, that came with some restrictions and also a very short time frame in which those funds had to be expended. So we're looking at expenses that incurred between March 1st and December the 30th of 2020. Now, we've advocated for, we know tribal organizations and other Indian tribes have advocated for an extension of that performance period. It's just not practical in many aspects to ask a tribe to spend that amount of money in that time. And of course, we're kind of middle of the road with the distribution that we receive. There's tribes that receive significantly less than that, and there's tribes that receive significantly more. Multiple hundreds of millions of dollars in CARES Act funding. So we took a very strategic and long-term approach, because the other thing that we set out of the gate is we don't know how long this is going to last, right? And we still don't have a clear picture of when we're going to see the end of the impact of COVID-19. So a lot of our resources went into connectivity, supporting telework, supporting teleeducation, making sure that Cherokee Central schools had the resources that they needed, that our students had resources that they needed, paying some of the administrative costs when the tribe and the tribal entities were closed to protect the employment of employees within those organizations, to pay benefits like emergency sick leave for people who tested positive or who maybe were a direct contact and then were going to be out of work for 14 days or more until they were cleared to return to work, to make sure that they didn't lose pay. The other piece is direct financial assistance to tribal families, and we did that in a number of ways. Utility bill assistance through our family services program, where you could sign up online and receive a payment against your utility account. Child care assistance. So we found with the closure of schools, people were having to pay a sitter or pay a family member to watch a child, and maybe even do virtual school with a child. And so if you had an increased cost of child care, for folks who had significant impact, said that they're a lower income family and they had either reduced hours or unable to find employment, or they're unable to work because of a health condition, they could go to our Tribal Assistance for Needy Families, the TANF program, and apply for assistance there. And that was funded through our CARES Act dollars. And then we also did a distribution to households with minors. So if you had a minor enrolled member in the household, you could apply, demonstrate the impact of COVID-19 on your household, and receive a payment. We actually made 2 of those payments. And then because of the per capita calculation and knowing that each of our members was going to have a significant amount of lost income, and some of the changes in the Treasury guidance that says you have to have those funds fully expended by 12/30. And that means when you're buying assets, they have to be procured and placed into service. We then had a significant amount of money where we wanted to invest in technology, but we can't have those assets in service by 12/30. It's just not practical. It takes time to install, it takes time to build, and now we're seeing supply chain issues where we can't get equipment in a timely manner. So then we had these financial resources available. We knew that we're going to have at least $2,000 per tribal member in lost income. We felt confident that we could release an assistance program to send another round of financial assistance to all adult tribal members who applied for the program. So the majority of resources have gone into direct payments to tribal members and tribal member families. And then we have those support services, supporting the technology build out, supporting the tribal government and government entities, entities like the Boys Club, entities like the casino, and paying those COVID-related expenses for personnel. Cleaning and sanitizing facilities has been a big priority for us, and we use the CARES Act for that purpose. So a number of ways that we've utilized that funding.
Okay.
And to keep in mind too, for the public, that that was treated like a federal grant award, right? So there are accountability requirements, there are accounting requirements. We have to account for every penny that came in and every penny that went out, and we have to report on that spend. So there's a lot of accountability at our level, and to know that we're held to a high standard, and we want to make sure that we get that right because of the amount of federal funding that the Eastern Band receives. It's significant, and we don't want to jeopardize that funding by having findings on our CARES Act administration.
Sure. And, it's very possible there'll be another round of stimulus, probably not until after the new administration takes over in the White House, of course. But I would imagine that tribes that have been diligent and managed their CARES money well up to this point, that will be noted when it comes time to distribute more stimulus in 2021 and beyond. So it's interesting, as teaching personal finance and encouraging people to make smart decisions with their money, we really stress saving. And, if you make a salary, you put a certain percentage of that into savings. A good rule of thumb is 10%. Always build that cushion in your personal finances so you're prepared in the event that you do lose hours at work, or there is some kind of a setback, or even a huge crisis like what we've all experienced over the last year. So it sounds like the tribe thinks the same way, just on a larger scale. You folks don't use all of that revenue that's generated by the casino to fund services. You have that cushion, you have those savings. So I think a lot of folks can learn from that and use that as a model when planning their own finances.
Absolutely. And I think when we're talking about per capita, it's important to remember that it's not a guaranteed source of income, right? It's not guaranteed to always be there or to be at the same level that it was even in the prior year. So I think that it's really an eye opener, right, to say this could really have a significant impact on households who may have created a dependency on that per capita income to all of a sudden not have it. Right. And now we're talking about this being the result of a public health crisis, but there are also very real threats to our market share of the gaming industry with other casinos coming online. So this per capita distribution in December was impacted by COVID, but to realize that this could be the new normal once those entrants to the market come into play and we see our players go elsewhere. And so I think part of the reason that this tribe is so diligent in creating that savings account is so that we can invest in other businesses and in other lines of business, so that we don't lose that market share. Right? We're creating these opportunities to generate revenues that come back to fund the tribal government and essential services.
And these are risks that all tribal governments and all tribal gaming operations are facing as well. And I mean, if you look at the EBCI per capita history, and in the early years, it was when Harrah's was still, or before it was even Harrah's, was a very small property. It was a very small payment, and then it really just started booming, and it was going. But it can't, realistically, it can't just keep rising like this and doubling every few years. I mean, eventually it's going to hit a peak. It's going to plateau, and that's going to be pretty much where it's going to stay. It might go down a little bit. It might go up a little bit. So, yeah, definitely people need to be aware of the volatility and fluctuations that can occur.
And we have a very good graphic that we present with our budget every year about gaming revenues in general, right? And so you kind of see this incremental growth, and then you see this leveling off, and then we've built something, right? We built a hotel tower, we built a convention center, we built a second casino. And so when you have that leveling off and then we build something, you see it go up again, and we level off again, we build something, and you see this incremental growth. There's going to be a limit to how much we can build right here. There's not a limit to how much we can own and how much we can build elsewhere. And so I think really diversifying the portfolio, looking at other lines of business, but also looking at the gaming industry, right? And how do we continue to be competitive there? Because we have a track record, right? We have a reputation in Indian country, and quite frankly, across the country, at being very good in that space, being good stewards, running things the right way. And that is positive when you're looking for business partners. People want to be in business with Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. And I think we have tremendous opportunity in front of us. They're not easy decisions. They're extremely tough decisions. They can be some scary decisions at times. Is this going to work? But I think that our people should have confidence in the leadership, that they ask the right questions, they do the right thing, and they're making sound decisions on behalf of the tribe for the long term. This isn't a short-term gain. How do we get over the mountain? This is how do we continue to climb? How do we continue to move to the next level and to the next step?
Well, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, you're a lot of things. You're a sovereign nation, you're a community, you're families, but I think you're also a brand. Mm-hmm. You're a brand, and you are an extremely well-respected brand. And I get all over Indian country, and I've been to a lot of Indian casinos. I've been to more Indian casinos than I can count, in states all across the country. And there are some other really, really high-end, seriously over the top, really, really premier facilities and properties, but you folks are right up there. You're right up there with what we see in parts of New England, some of the really, really high-end casinos, the Pacific Northwest. Eastern Band is right there. You're right. You're A-list all the way. Yeah. So really, really impressive.
Yeah. Definitely. I definitely agree there. So I think it's important for our people to acknowledge that. Maybe not all of our people get to see that. And it's important to know how well respected we are in Indian country, and that's where we want to be, right? Because if we do well, then we're setting example for other Indian tribes to do well. We're building a model that other tribes can hopefully follow and be a part of.
Okay. Well, Cory, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much information about per capita, about the gaming industry, about miners trust, and just some of the ways the tribal budgets work and how finance works within the tribe. I want to end with just asking you, on the family level, individual level, do you have any tips or suggestions for anybody there on the boundary that might be struggling this holiday season? They were really counting on a larger per capita payment, and they're just, it's going to be a little bit leaner this year. It's going to be tougher. Any advice, words of wisdom?
Just to think about, there are programs available, right? So we don't want our people to go without, that there are programs available to you. So, reach out to your leadership, reach out to the programs. Our job is to try to find ways to help tribal members navigate this crisis and navigate the systems that we put into place. But also to kind of pay close attention that this may not be a one-off event, and that per capita is not a guarantee. And so we can't treat it as guaranteed income to our households. And so looking at resources that we've made available here at Eastern Band for financial planning, for things that are available through the Sequoia Fund about managing a personal budget, is take a look at that. And if you're able to set aside a savings account, start small. You can do that and build it incrementally. There's some great kind of savings plans out there where you save a little bit each week and see how that kind of adds up. And then the other thing too is that it's interesting about investing is that everything that we invest in as a tribal government in our major funds, like the Miners Trust Fund, can be completely replicated with commercial products. So everything that we buy as an institutional investor, you can buy as an individual tribal member. And so I've had that conversation with people who are exiting the Miners Trust Fund, that if they wanted to take a step back and completely replicate the Miners Trust Fund in their own brokerage fund, that they could do that. They could buy all of the same products. And so we've had a few that have asked for the fund lineup so that they could go and do that. So that's promising. I think that there are resources available to folks, and know that tribal leadership is here to provide assistance and to help provide some guidance wherever it's needed.
Okay, yeah. And you mentioned earlier how, you have to account for every dollar that goes through these budgets with the CARES money. And a big part of personal finance as well is just being organized. And I think if we think of ourselves, if we think of our households like a business or like a tribal government, you have to account for every dime that goes through your books. And I think families as well, individuals, if we could kind of be inspired by that and take the same approach and really pay attention to where our money's going, what's coming in, what's going out, I think we could really set ourselves up for success that way.
I certainly agree. Certainly agree. And we're very fortunate to have resources here that are available to the community to get that education, to ask those questions, and then have people who are committed to kind of helping you get started.
Yeah. Well, Cory, again, thank you so much. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Okay. Again, really appreciate you coming on. I want to wish you a very, very happy Thanksgiving next week with your 5 children, your family. How many turkeys do you have to buy for that many kids?
Just one.
Really 30-pounder they got there. You got to fit in your trunk. All right. Well, thank you again, Cory. Take care.
Thank you. You do the same.